This is Mary at the.meri.atelier, and this is another short story, and I'm going to talk about fussy cutting. Now, I've kind of talked about fussy cutting before, and if you watch stream this morning, you will have seen where I cut out all these wonderful porcelain pieces. Now, I'll talk more about cutting things out, but what I want to talk about here is cutting detailed images. The details, like, oh, what about this little knob on this vase here? What about the inside of that picture? Pitcher. And I kind of want to talk about cutting details in particular, but let's start with this one. Maybe I should zoom in one. Let me zoom in one, get just a little bit closer so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. Be a painting or a picture that I saw that I cut out. And I'm just going to talk about trimming the edges. Now, you could trim these with a trimmer, or you could trim them with your scissor. When you trim them with a scissor, on the longer sides, use a bit longer scissors and start and just trim that way. Now, when I do that, I don't always, for some reason, I always curve off that way or curve that way. So, yeah, you could trim these with your trimmer too to get a nice even, if you're particular about it, get a nice even trim. On these, I think I like the even trim, but sometimes when I'm using them in my blue books, I'm not that particular. But in this case, I am going to use a nice trim here. There we go. But you can't very well use the trimmer on these pieces. So when you cut these out, kind of look at where you're going to trim and what the challenge is going to be. There are a lot of curves here. There's white. This is a porcelain piece, and that dog's paw is actually white in there. So you could trim it off way in there, but that would look weird. You want to make sure that you trim it. And I'm going to use my smaller scissors. You want to trim it where the white of the paw actually is, which is right here. And I am using, when I'm trimming it, I'm using this part of my scissor blades right in here. And because these are, let's start here. This is a fairly long, flat line, little curve in there, but fairly long and flat. And so if I get in here and just trim it like this, let your scissor blade go clear to the end of the snip. And then I'm at the curve here, so I'm just going to curve this a little. And then I'm going to get my scissor blade and go clear to the end of the snip again, like that. And that's kind of the same way for the entire piece. And of course, we've talked about turning the paper and not the scissors. Turn the paper for around these, I call them long S curves, the long curves where you don't have to worry about a detailed cut. You're just kind of following the curvature of the piece. Now I'm cutting, in this particular instance, I'm cutting close to the image. So there's no white showing along the border. Now, I'm going to, on this, I'm going to stop leaving white here. I'm going to leave some white line here just to show you that this is also a fussy cut technique. It is okay to leave a white Then it kind of depends on what you're going to use your fussy cuts for. But they call this a cartoon. Cartoon, like you're reading the funny papers. When you leave that little bit of white around your figure, they call that a cartoon cut. And I'm just doing this for example to show you the difference. So here I cut close to the edge, and I don't always do that perfectly. Sometimes I go back and clean it up. And here I left a white cartoon edge around there. Now, when I actually use this, I'll probably decide to cut the cartoon edge off. Okay, let's talk about this piece. This is, look at the difference if you're going to fussy cut these three images, or we'll include this one. And I'm talking, these are smaller pieces. This one's pretty large, and this one's fairly large. But these are fairly small images, especially this little tray down there. I'm going to snip that little tray off because I really don't want it there. Let's talk about this. This is a tiny image, and it's got that handle in the center. This is a large image. This is a large image here, and it's got this space underneath of the horse's feet and tummy. This is a fairly large curvature of a vase, and this one has some nice curves, but it's an easy fussy cut there because there's not a lot of intricate cutting to it. It's a pretty smooth cut. So let's start with this one, a smooth cut. I'm going to use my larger scissors, and I like to kind of start at the bottom. Notice how I turned my paper when I come around that curve, and let my scissors go clear down to the end of the snip. Let it go clear down to the end of the snip. And whoops, I see where I'm going here. Like that. Now, I'm by no means a fussy cut pro. I make mistakes. I see I got a little white here showing what I don't want showing. I make mistakes, but I'm just sharing with you some things that I've observed. And I think Dee Dee Willingham was talking about, at one of her chats, was talking about doing the long snip like this and letting it use your whole scissor blade. I think I learned that from her on these longer pieces. So I kind of credit Dee Dee for that hint. But I do it all the time. And that was a pretty nice cut in there. Now, because I've got a little white up there, but that's actually the back part of the vase. On something like this, you don't really want to use your large scissors for. It's really clumsy. You want to go to smaller scissors, and even maybe your embroidery scissors would that you only use for paper. You know, buy a pair of the small embroidery scissors that you only use for fussy cutting. But we're going to use, these are Tim Holtz small scissors, and I'm going to cut this out. Now, notice where I'm cutting, where I put that paper. That's right at the very tip of my blade. And I find if I try to cut here, down in here, it works. It works. But let me tell you, when you're getting into the detail, of course, now this is a nice long smooth cut across the handle here. That's a nice long smooth cut. I can move my image down in there. But when I'm doing a curve where there's a lot of detail, I go down to the tip of my scissors. See, I moved that paper down toward the tip of my scissors. And I find that works so much easier. And it's easier to turn your paper across the point of your scissors than clear across down here. It's just so much easier. Cut that off. And now we're cutting this blade again, this long snip again. Turn my paper and cut the bottom off. So there's that one. Now what about the inside part here? I got a little white. Curves are still something I'm working on, curves and circles. But what about this white area? Generally, I leave it until I get ready to use it. Then I decide Dee will paint. And in fact, if she's doing a piece like this, I've seen her do this just recently, and I thought, man, that's really a cool idea. She'll take it, just say that Dee is going to collage this down in her book, and she's got this. She might cut and leave that kind of white area around there, kind of a cartoon cut. She might cut it a little closer. But after she collages it down, just say she's collaging it on a black surface like my desktop, she'll take a black paint and actually leave that white paper and paint this entire area in and paint in this area in here. I do that, but I haven't done it a lot. Sometimes when I get ready to use it, I will actually leave this, and it depends. These horse hoofs are connected to this base. If I cut this base off like this, I would still leave that white area, because just like arms and extended arms and maybe even heads, if you put it into whatever you're using, you risk these getting tangled and folded and, really kind of sometimes mangled inside of before you get to use them. But generally, I'll leave this area. And it just depends if you actually want to. If I'm putting this down on a printed piece, let's just say I had this picture here, and I wanted these two ladies to show underneath of these horse hoofs for some reason. Well, I would probably cut that area out. And you can either make a slit like an X here, and let's do that on one. What you want to do is kind of gently fold your page, not crease it, just kind of gently fold it and make a little snip in here like that. And then let's get the smaller scissors. Then come in and make an X, cut out to a corner here, cut out to a corner here, and to a corner here, or to your image. And of course, then to the image here. And it'll be a lot easier to fussy cut something like this. And get your, here again, see where I'm putting this piece? Right down at the very tip of my scissors. I'm not trying to get my whole scissors in there and cut like that. And I've just started doing this myself. I just find that it's so much easier. And I thought that I would just share that in one of my little short stories here. So I'm actually going to cut these out. And see, I didn't really get that. It was kind of hard to get. You may have to go back and trim it up a little. But once you get one out, the others come out pretty easy. Now, when you have a longer line, it's okay to use the middle of your scissors. And then I come down here to the hoofs, and I'm back here down at the tip of the... It's a lot easier to get that detail if you're only cutting with the very tip of your scissors in there. And then you can go to the center of your scissors on a longer piece, on a longer snip. Like this could be longer. And you just kind of curve this around. And get that little corner out there. Now, say I want these two ladies to show up underneath of the, I still have this cut, right? Sometimes it shows if you don't have it trimmed right. There. So at least their heads show. But what I'm saying is there are times you will want to cut this area out, whether you do it with an X-Acto knife or your scissors. And there are times when you can just take your paintbrush, say it's on a surface like this, I could take black paint like Dee Dee does and very carefully paint this black to match that and that. So let's talk about this again. See where I'm starting this down right in here? Because that's a pretty simple cut. It's a pretty simple cut. And then I'm turning my paper. I still am using this part of my scissors. And do that long snip. And you'll have to open your scissor blades, especially when you got a long side. You'll have to open your scissor blades when you get down to the end just to get another snip. And then in here, instead of trying to curve this all around like this, which you can do, it's easier to take it out and come back this direction and fussy cut from the other direction and get that piece out that way. There we go. And I still have a little, sometimes it's especially when I'm doing camera work, I can't get it up to my eyes to see exactly where I'm going. So let's do this. Now the ears, I have a choice. I can leave the white around. Let's cut the off around his nose area here. Well, I really trying to think whether that is part of his nose area here or if that nose area ends. I think I'm going to snip this off a little like this. Now, because this is detail, I'm going to go back down to the very tip of my scissors here. It's just so much easier. And I'm going to snip on this side of the ear here and cut out that area. And then I'm going to leave this for now and snip this side. And then I have this long area again where I'm cutting using this side, this portion of my scissors. And you just let your scissors flow closed. You'll have to open them again to do another snip, and then turn your image as you snip. You don't turn your scissors, you turn your image. Let your scissors do all the work here. And like I said, I'm not a pro at this, but I have learned things along the way. I've been doing an awful lot of fussy cutting. And I'm trying to develop ways to get better at it. I'm still learning to fussy cut circles like dinner plates. That's a big challenge, and rings and moons. Now this looks funny up here with his ears. It looks funny up in there. I haven't fussy cut it, but you have to kind of make a choice of when are you going to use it. Are you fussy cutting and going to use it right away? Then you'll probably want to snip that off. If you're fussy cutting and going to put it in your little baggie or your little container, you might want to leave that white space in there until you actually use the image. And then you can go back and cut that out. I'm going to leave it in this case. Let's talk about, let me snip this, clean this up a little here. Let's talk about that white space between his bottom, his derriere, and his tail. There's a little white space in there. The same thing. If you want, you can paint that out, like to match like my surface of my desk is black. If I was going to collage this down, I could just paint that black. I could paint this black. But if you wanted to cut it out, how are you going to cut it out? You're going to, you could cut it with an X-Acto knife, or you could just take a snip right here at the end. And I've done this before, especially on when I'm cutting ladies that have their arms on their hips, their hands on their hips. Sometimes say this is their arm here coming down this way, and this is their hip. Well, there's that space in there, especially if their hands are on the hip. And what I'll do sometimes is just snip that right at the base and then just cut that white space out if you really want it out. And then when you glue it in your glue, wherever you're going to collage it down, you just collage that. Let's get up. You collage that down so whatever's behind it will say there's some text in there. You just glue this down. And nobody will ever know if you glue this down. They'll never know that you made that cut. But I'm going to leave this for now, this white area. And I'm going to leave this for now. You could cut this white area out if you wanted, because this piece is sturdy enough with this base that these legs aren't going to bend and tear. But the ears, if I cut around those ears, I risk those ears getting caught on other pieces and bending and tearing. So when I actually collage it down, I'll cut that area out and decide what I want to do with this area. So one last piece that I want to talk about, and that's something intricate like this. And here again, I'm going to emphasize using, for the longer areas, using this part of your scissors. And you could cut this piece out in here with your larger scissors up in here, but I do like these smaller scissors when doing, I use the larger scissors on pieces like this or larger pieces, because if I would use, well, let's take an example here. I cut this one out this morning, this piece. Now, it's already been fussy cut, but I just don't put it in my smaller bag because it won't fit. But when I cut this out, this actually has gray along the rim of the plate. And I'm still learning to do nice, smooth circles. So I don't have anything to say about that yet. I know I'll get it eventually. I guess what I could say the most is try, like if I was going to fussy cut this gray area off, I would probably try as carefully as I could that gold line. The gold line gets really thin over here. And I might have left that gray on purpose. I don't know if I left that gray on purpose. I can't, because it looks like that's not a part of the plate. That looks like the background. So let's just assume that it is. And I'm going to fussy cut this gray area off. And I decided that, oh yeah, I'm going to use my smaller fussy cut scissors. Well, here's the thing. Let's start down here where this black line is. All right, I'm going to follow the gold, and I'm going to do the long cut, and I'll cut down to the deal. And then I'm going to do a long cut and cut down to the end of the blade. And then a long cut and cut down to the end of the blade. And a long cut. Can you see what I'm doing? I'm going long cut, snip, snip, snip. Well, when you use a larger scissors, you do the same thing, only it goes farther. It's a long cut, but you cover more space. And see, I'm trying to follow the edge of that gold line. Long cut down to the end of the blade, but I get a larger swipe. And I don't have the really long scissors, Tim Holtz. They're on my list of gonna get. But these work fine. These are good. But what I'm saying is the difference in your cut is probably about an inch each time. And I don't know, I guess for larger pieces and big smooth lines like this, I actually prefer the larger scissors. It doesn't feel right to use these little scissors on a large piece unless I got detail work in here. When I have detail work, I'll use the smaller scissors, even working off of the tip of the scissors. Let's just finish cutting this. So I'm still working with cutting circles. I wouldn't say that I'm the pro on it. I've seen some very, very, very nice circle cutting. So we'll say that this has been fussy cut now, but I have to put it in the larger bag. Now I have one more piece, and I chose this one because it's more intricate in here. And I'm going back to my smaller scissors on here. It's just easier to get at it, and I'm going to do the long cut here. And then I'll snip it this way. And I'll even come down closer when I'm doing these curves in here. Go back to the tip of your scissors. It's just so much easier to manipulate around those curves when you're doing cutting with this part of the scissors instead of this part. I hope that makes sense. And I don't know how long I've gone here. This might be a little bit bigger, a little bit longer short story. I try to keep them under 6 minutes, but that doesn't always happen. And see, I can get, there are some tassels on here. Now I'm going to come this way and snip that off. Now we're getting into the long cuts again. A long cut. I can do a long cut to here, but now I want to go back down to my tip of my scissors there to do this intricate, and especially something like this. Now here again, you can either leave that white area around that little knob, and in this case I am going to cut it off because I want to show you that I'm using the very tip of my scissors, and I think it might be better to come at it this way. Snip it off there. Get rid of all that white waste, but come at it this way. And turn my paper, and there you go. And I don't have it all yet. There's still a little white in there. But for the intricate parts, use the very, very tip of your scissors to cut with. It'll be so much easier. And you don't have to do all the intricate pieces at once. You can leave that white around that intricate piece. I cut it to show you, to demonstrate on this piece. See how hard it is to get in there sometimes with and it was fairly easy, but it's easier to come from the other direction and snip it off that way. And then snip this way. And you can get your scissor blades in there. Now I have a little piece there. I'm not going to keep that piece. I'm going to cut it off. In there, and I see I got a little, you can clean this up as you go. I got a little white area there that I don't want. If I can get that off. Okay, so now I'm going to come at this angle, and hopefully that'll get it for me, and it did. And then I have room to come here and then there. Now in this case I turned my scissors. Probably should have turned the the paper like this, and then do the cut here, and come back at it this way. There we go. Now, sometimes I go back and I have to decide whether that's actually a piece of the vase. It looks like it might be, but it almost looks like white. So I'm going to trim it off on the sides here. I could touch that up with paint. I think this is actually a piece of the vase, but I'm not sure. So I'm just going to trim it off. There. So then you have all these little annoying pieces to get rid of. I call them, they annoy me, all the little pieces. So here are my fussy cuts. I did the horse, and I left that. I cut this part out. I showed you how I did an X in there. I showed you how I removed this piece behind his tail here, just cutting the tail portion, and then it'll glue down fine. You might want to go in. Another option is to go in and paint this negative space out. Like if I'm putting it down on a black page, I could just paint that out. But if I'm putting it down on a figured area, like if I wanted that lady's head to show, I would want to cut that out. You could also snip, rather than doing the X here, you could snip across his hoofs there and cut that out. And then when you glue it down, just glue the hoofs down. The reason I don't do that is because you've destroyed the firmness of this piece. That this leg would be floppy. And I left this area here for the ears so they don't get bent. And this I trimmed with a larger piece. You can either trim it with your larger scissors or use your paper trimmer and even it off that way. So I did this piece and this piece. I did this piece just to show you that some pieces are just nice, smooth curves. And then there's this little tiny piece that you definitely want to use your smaller scissors on. And then we did this intricate piece here where I showed how to get into these intricate areas just using the very tip, cutting with the very tip of your scissors right in there instead of cutting in here. So those are just some of my observations in fussy cutting. As I learn more, I will share them with you. I have a couple other things that I want to share, but I don't want these videos to get too long. So thank you for watching. Look at all the fussy cuts I'm getting here. I've got all of these, and then I've got all of these that I'm trimming off, but I'm actually going to put this one back in here because it's a larger bag. But I've got all of these pieces that I need to fussy cut. Oh, and one other thing here, we talked about the cartoon cut on this side versus cutting right up to the edge of the piece on this side. So I hope that you've enjoyed this little fussy cut discussion. And as I said, I'm not a pro, but I'm learning things as I go. And as I learn, I will share them with you. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next chapter. Let's move these down a little so that you can actually see them. There we go. I also like to kind of place these because I'll be doing a thumbnail. Maybe I'll put my scissors on here like this and like this. How's that for a thumbnail? Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next chapter. Bye for now.